This video is meant to help you understand the criteria and the purpose for the two-page critical analysis papers that you'll be doing this semester. All right, first the purpose. The first purpose is the most important, and that is to help you shift your perspective when reading research from a direct consumer to a critical consumer. So up until a certain point in the course, we're just working on trying to understand what the literature says, what the methodologies are, what they mean, and just interpreting correctly. But at some point, the real purpose of this course is to help you become a critical consumer, and so we want to emphasize that, and that's the purpose of the critical analysis papers. And you'll see in the first criteria and what we consider good and bad really makes that point that we don't want you to be describing and interpreting correctly only, but we really want you to be doing critical analysis. And the second is that same value is a value underneath the literature review, and we think the critical analysis papers are going to help build skills towards important criteria for the literature review. Specifically, the criteria in the row about methodology. So a proficient score in your literature review means that when you write about the literature in your literature review, you're doing substantial critical analysis of research methods used to produce claims. So in your literature review also, you're not just reporting what the literature says, but you're saying this claim in the literature is strong because of these methodologies, these claims in the literature are weak because of these issues with methodology. And here's an unresolved issue because the methodology has not been sufficient so far to address the question. Things like that. All right, a few process points. First, when you do your critical analysis paper, you're going to do it on a primary source document. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any methodology to critique. Second, and you'll see this in the examples that are available to you, what we want you to do is copy the abstract, put it at the top of the paper. And your article should be in Zotero so that if we want to see the original and read more, we can just go into Zotero and find the article that you've tagged with your name on it that obviously matches the abstract, and we can read the article or scan through the article. Because you're giving us the abstract and because we have the full text available to us in Zotero, we do not want you to describe what the research says. We only want you to be doing critical analysis. So you might feel like, well, I have to explain this, and then I'll do my critical analysis. You don't have to explain it. We'll figure it out. All right, it's going to be about 2 pages double-spaced. You're going to do 2 of these this semester. Both of the ones that you do should be taken from primary source research that you are using in your group literature review. So this is going to do double duty. So you're doing the critical analysis paper, but all the analysis you do for that is going to help support the writing of your group literature review. For the first critical analysis paper, we're hoping that you'll be able to decide among yourselves in the group which articles you're going to review individually. So in other words, the group's going to say, hey, we want to have 4 critical analysis papers reviewed by our 4 group members, all in the same theme. And you do this one, etc. Later on in the course, that's going to help you as a group come together and say, now if we're going to do substantial critical analysis of the research in this theme, we've already done a lot for these 4 articles. Let's see what we can do together, combining some of that critical analysis. All right, so what we've got is a number of good and bad examples, and not for every level of the rubric, but just for some important points. All right, the most important thing, again, is critical analysis. So I've got an example that is focused on claims and conclusions, or primarily describes, keyword being describes, versus substantial discussion of the research methods, analyzing issues, etc. Right. I'm going to emphasize the bad one here. So this is an example of the bad one. And this actually wasn't done by a student. I created this to create a bad one. So there's a a title of the article, that's fine. Abstract, that's what we want you to do. But then everything in gray is mere description. Right? For example, participants. 2 young white women were selected to participate in the study. They were both excellent students in high school, great college students as well. They were trained in inquiry-based science instruction. The study followed them over a year's time. That is simply reporting what was said in the article. So keep going through that. Now this yellow text, and you have this full PDF available to you, so you can pause this and read it. But the yellow text I would consider critical analysis. So the way that we would view this is anything in gray here that is description, it's as if you didn't write it, because we are going to skim right over it. As soon as we see its description, we're not reading it. So this is essentially a student who turned in a 1-paragraph critical analysis paper. So this would obviously get a very poor score. Then there's another one. I'm not going to delve into this, but if you read this one, you'll see a lot of substantial critical analysis, and the difference between the two will definitely be obvious to you. All right, the next category in the rubric is application of research concepts. So what we're saying here is that when you're reviewing an experimental study, you should use critical analysis concepts and criteria for analysis that apply to an experimental study. And you should use the vocabulary correctly, and you should be demonstrating that you understand the criteria for analyzing analyzing research methods. Right. So here I don't have a good example. I mean, good example is really the absence of error and everything making sense. And I'm not going to give you an example of significant misapplication of criteria, but I want to instead emphasize misuse of terminology, which is misuse of vocabulary, which is very, very common in a way that a lot of people will lose points. So it's a very modest kind of error, but one we want you to avoid and just be aware of. So the application of vocabulary concepts example that's in D2L is a fine critical analysis paper, but it's an analysis of a correlational study. And you don't know this yet probably, but this person uses the term internal validity when really they mean credibility or something else. Now, internal validity is a concept that is related to experimental research, and it's the most important concept with experimental research, and we hammer it in this course when we do the chapter on experimental research. And so it's a kind of attractive, interesting concept once you learn it. And so people tend to start over-applying it to other things. And when they apply it outside the area of experimental research, they're really misapplying the concept. And so that would be an example of some misuse of vocabulary or concepts that you could lose points on. Now, the person that wrote this really didn't misunderstand what they were writing about. I think they had a good concept, and their analysis actually made sense. If they were just using different terminology, it would have been fine. The last criteria in the rubric is the synthesis criteria. And here we'll want to contrast the idea of addressing issues one by one, or writing something a little more holistic, where not every issue is as important as every other issue, and you explain why some are important and why some are not important. And it's more where you tell a story about the research and not just technical report one by one without integrating. So here is the issue one by one example. And if you were to open this up and read it, and I don't want to take time to go through it, you'll see that each paragraph addresses a different issue. And you can't tell by reading it whether one issue is more important than the other, and there are no transitional sentences between the paragraphs. So this is an example of issues one by one. The synthesis exemplar is a nice contrast to this, and I've highlighted a few things in yellow for you to pay attention to. So right off the bat, the first sentence is, the researcher's choice of sampling stands as one of the glaring weaknesses of this study. So right off the bat, I know that the sampling issue is more important than other issues. And the last sentence in that paragraph, by limiting the major, the university, and the sampling method, the study proves unconvincing. So this person is saying that not only is it one of the more significant issues in this research, but it's so significant that they are not convinced by the research itself. And then the next sentence is a good transition sentence, and it starts to tell a story. So this person says, this is unfortunate because the actual study was well executed. So in other words, the story that's being told is a lot of things were done right, but one thing was done wrong, and it was so significant that it ruined the research. All right, hope that those examples and non-examples are helpful to you. The one that I would look at as like a good overall example of a nice paper and what you should be shooting for is the critical analysis exemplar.